Good morning. This is the Dr. Obitashaka Show, and I have something real powerful in store for you today. Each show is special, put a lot of work into them, but this one is a real special one. Before getting into the show today, I just want to go through a few little background things. First, last week's show, which the topic was the Twa, the mothers of African and world civilization. That show focused on general Twa contributions to humanity, showing their dispersion throughout the world, starting in Africa, showing that they're the mothers and fathers of humanity and the mothers and fathers of civilization. And that show is really the foundation for this one, though most of the shows that I've been doing is a foundation for this show. So today we'll be getting into part 2 of that. I just want to stress that there's a lot of preparation that I put into these shows, selecting topics when I'm going to interview a guest, selecting the best guests who are usually the experts in their particular field. And then I have a preparation method that's rigorous. I don't just come on here and just go off the seat of my pants, though I certainly do improvise. And though I've written on many of these topics, I'm always doing something new. So I'm not going to just restrict what I do on the show to what I've already read, because in our culture, that's kind of a no-no. We don't like to do the same thing twice. And so while I'm covering some topics, some of which are brand new, others I've covered before. They're from a different dimension and greater detail. I'm bringing out new stuff. So last week on the 12th, that was new information. It's building on my book, The Integration Trap, Generation Gap, caused by a choice between two cultures, but it's going well beyond that. It was new information on the Twa contribution to humanity and civilization. The other thing that you should understand is the method that I use is different from the method that you normally find with normal scholarship or so-called classroom stuff. I underwent a transformation in the 60s, and so it led me to throw out the methodology that the European uses. And so I have a different methodology, and that's an African methodology. It's one where what you talk about is what you live, as opposed to a methodology where it's just information for regurgitation. So to really get what I'm putting down, it's important that you try and internalize it in your life and not just have it as information. And so that's a second thing that's different about my approach than the normal Western approach. It's not just information. And then, of course, as you've noted, I'm using the past to use it as a tool for transforming the present and the future. So that also means that there's a different methodology, and this one is a practical one that you can apply to your life. So these are like backgrounds for what I do. Yesterday, I was on Dr. Susan Tata's show, It's called Pan-African DTV. D is in David. And that show is up on their site. You should check it out. And in there, I was looking at African family systems based on my research on the mother principle, return to the African mother principle of male and female equality and how we can apply that to our lives today. This Sunday and Monday, I will be doing two discussions with the United Kingdom, Blacks in the United Kingdom around African Liberation Day. The group I'm in, Pan-African People's Organization, we've done African Liberation Day since the 70s. We don't do it anymore. These were days where we came together to provide support for liberation movements. But Africans in many parts of the world are still doing it, in some parts of the United States and in the United Kingdom. So since 1973, Pan-African People's Organization has worked with Pan-African Congress movement in the United Kingdom, pushing African Liberation Day, and this is the time of African Liberation Day. So this Sunday, I'll be doing a show, Pan-African Congress movement, on economics and rebuilding Africa and African communities around the world through economic development. And then Monday, I'll be talking about with panelists, both of these will be group discussions, talking about reparations and the reparation movements around the world and what are the aims and objectives of it and what has been achieved and how can we acquire the power to achieve full reparations. So these are some background things. I've got a commitment from Dr. Theophil Obenga, who is the best scholar on dynastic Egypt in the world, a multidimensional scholar, Sheikh Anta Diop's best student. He's committed to coming to the show next week, and we'll have a conversation. However, I'm presenting it this way because I have to work out some things with him and to make sure that he's doing what he has to do so we can broadcast him, that he's not using a cell phone, that he's got a computer, that he has an expert working with him so that this will come through. So we'll be going through dry runs to see that this works. So if the dry run show it works, he'll be on in a discussion with me next Saturday. So it's only when I work through these details that I'm sure. And that'll be posted when you get a notice. Then if Dr. Obenga is on the notice, that means he and I will be doing a show together. And that'll just be one of a number. So my topic for today is the Twa, who are also known as Anu, the founders of Kemet or Egypt, the world's greatest civilization. Last week, we looked at how the Twa gave birth to humanity and civilization in Africa and around the world and brought in new information on how they civilized the taller Africans who came along later, because the Twa are the first human beings coming into being, as I pointed out last week, over 144,000 years ago. So this show is going to focus on new work on this. I've done my book, The Integration Trap, Generation Gap Caused by a Choice Between Two Cultures, covers some of this, but I'm going into other aspects not in the book while also building on the book. Before getting into that, I just want to remind you that this show, it's going on 6 months now, has been covering a number of topics. And these topics have all had as a central objective strengthening your sense of self-knowledge, self-respect, and self-love. And so there have been a number of different things that we've covered in different shows, because this show covers history, culture, politics, spirituality, family relationships, and much more. So this is the purpose, to encourage you, if you're not already aware of it, to become more aware of the powers that reside within you, both in terms of the spirit gifts that we covered in a number of shows, and your identity, and fully appreciating and understanding the power that you have as African people, Black Africans. For many of my viewers, dealing with the reality of America or wherever you are in the world. And of course, this idea of empowerment is good for everyone. All human beings have this God within us. That is the nature of being a human being. So these shows have done a tour that was designed to be a tour within, where we looked at the inner self. So we've examined the heart mind, which we showed is a real thing, that the Kemites and a number of other people, Japanese and Chinese, have also seen is real. And it is the deeper part of the mind, the part where the ancients said God dwells within each of us. So the purpose of that was to get people more acquainted with what's going on inside of us. And this is an extremely important part, where intellect and intuition are fused, not separate. And because we're spirit beings on a physical experience, that as I've shown in previous shows, and I think this is true, I don't think that this is a theory, human beings in general are beings who made a compact in heaven to be here. We're just not here willy-nilly. We've got purpose. And in those shows presented some information to indicate that in the area of parapsychology, as well as the insights of various African civilizations, Yoruba, Dogon, particularly Kemetic, Asante, and others, to show that it's no accident that people who are spiritually gifted see the same thing as African deep thinkers assert. So this is important, because if we understand that we're spirits having a human experience and we're here with a purpose, then we'll have greater appreciation for why it's important for us to really develop our gifts. And then we've also looked at the way in which destiny works, and how it's important for us to understand our innate gifts and to appreciate them and draw from them, as well as to look at our weaknesses and to work on them, because we're here in part for that purpose. So this has been part of what we've looked at. And one of the reasons for that is because the way the Western system is set up, it's to make people cogs in their machinery. That is, the more highly educated you are, the more you're being prepared to serve their machine. And, we call this in the university critical thinking, which I always laughed at, that they would actually have a course in telling people how to think. I refuse to teach that class because people are born with the capacity to think. Now, whether you think consciously or not depends on what you have to think with. And it's when you have a knowledge of self that you're able to see things through your own eyes and to think for yourself and to think in your own interests and the interests of your people. So one of the central aims of this show is to deal with the sixfold stages to mental freedom, which is the process of transformation by tracking by identifying the stages that people go through when they're waking up, a process that I've gone through, a process that Malcolm X, a number of our people have gone through. And it's a process that when you really go through it, then what you call healing, you won't be talking about, I need to be healed. Because basically that healing work has got to do either with the confusion that's been brought into the Black community through the drug traffic that has disrupted families and communities and driven a wedge between the young and the old, or it's leftover stuff from slavery. And in either case, that creates a real problem for our people. So when you have a whole understanding of your identity as well as your destiny, then you're in good shape for combating the system, but also living a life where you're happy and not in internal turmoil. Though I know that there are things that have been done to some people that are bound to create turmoil. So it's a way of working on that if that's the case. So that's part of what we've been talking about before. So slavery and colonialism, the systems, colonialism, where outsiders have come into Africa and other countries and taken political and economic and very often tried to take cultural control, very difficult to do, through military conquest. That has, along with enslavement, has induced a sense that I talked about last week of historical amnesia, leaving victims of slavery and colonialism to believe that they have no history worth knowing, and to believe that the past can't really help them out in the present. This is a thought system implanted by miseducation. And as Carter G. Woodson observed in his classic work, Miseducation of the Negro, the more highly educated the Black person or person of color is, the more likely they are to be useless to their people, unless, of course, they have scientific, technological skills. But even then, if you're not grounded in your own history, your own culture, your own identity, and have a strong sense of your life purpose, your destiny, then you're likely to use that science in the wrong way, or you're likely to embrace a philosophy of science that goes against nature, a philosophy that seeks to control. So Carter G. Woodson's point was, the African that's made the greatest contribution to Blacks in this country has been the one that has been least educated in their system, because then they have not been put in as serious a position of doubting themselves. And there's a lot of proof around us of this. And so for people like me that underwent this miseducational system, then part of the process of education is throwing out the miseducation and undergoing an old new education through awakening and through other systems. The book I'm working on now, Apprenticeship, where you master under masters. That's how John Henry Clark, who had a 12th grade education, became one of the greatest scholars in the world, because he apprenticed under masters, working to master the masters, something that we carried out of Africa. So why are we doing part 2 of this series, the Twa, the Anu, founders of Kemet, the world's greatest civilization? We are doing these shows on the origin of humanity and the origin of civilization, with an emphasis on the origin of Black humanity and the origin of Black and African civilization. Because when you know your historical and cultural roots and you have grounding in your past, you receive, through knowing those roots, the ability to free your mind. And from both the shackles of slavery and the shackles of colonialism. This knowledge takes you out of the situation where you're under remote control puppetry. I was talking to Dr. Obenga day before yesterday for about 2.5 hours. And I was telling him the work that I'm doing now on SEBA to put in place a system of education to replace this system of miseducation. And I was pointing out to him that this goes beyond what Carter G. Woodson was talking about, which is necessary that we get the right information in. And as I pointed out before, having the right information is necessary. That is the truth of your history, your culture, and everything else about you. That's necessary, but it's not sufficient. And the reason it's not sufficient is even when you have the correct information, if you have their methodology, their method for teaching, then you're in the position of still being miseducated, because their methodology is to teach something so that you can repeat it. And even when you get the right information, if that's your methodology for teaching, you are teaching people to be placed under control, because all you're doing is puppetry. All you're doing is repeating something. An old brother that I knew in Tanzania, his name was Mzee. We called him Mzee, meaning elder, and the old brother from the States. He said, when you teach an educated person something, they quote somebody. But he said, when you talk to the average brother or sister, they give you their opinion. Meaning the miseducated has got a bunch of facts to quote, and those facts usually don't apply to them anyway. But the one who's come up under the school of life, they've got opinions. They've thought about things. And so that's the difference between the miseducational system of the West, their methodology, and the African method. The African method is one that frees your spirit, mind, and body. And the European one creates academic schizophrenics. Their thoughts are separate from their actions very often. And that includes, and especially for African-centered people, if you don't have the right methodology, you will be up there quoting a lot of facts that are very good, and then talking and walking and communicating and thinking the white way. You be an Oreo cookie, dark on the outside and white on the inside. Or if you're Asian, a banana, yellow on the outside, white on the inside. Native American, an apple, red on the outside, white on the inside. And if you're Latino, a coconut, brown on the outside, white on the inside. You'll be caught in the same conceptual trap. So this is the nature of this show. So while you're getting information, if you don't begin to learn the process for internalization, the process so that you can be what you learn, then you're going to still be in the same position. You're just going to have a lot of good facts to quote. And I should point out, the way our mothers raised us, they didn't raise us that way. They raised us to be what they were teaching us to be. And the most important thing they raised us to be, and this is a mantra in Medu Neture, speak truth, do truth, is to speak truth, do truth. And their greatest achievement in life is to see that they help develop a good human being. That is the measure of their success. And whatever failures we may have in life, if a mother can point, and especially a Black mother, can point to the child and say, he's a good person, she's a good person, she's accomplished her objective. And so the mother knows you got to get inside of that child to get what needs to be in them, inside of them. They know how to do that. And I should point out, the mother, who is the basic teacher, teaches through love. And that's why the child will embrace the teachings of the mother, no matter how flawed the mother may be. All human beings are flawed. But basically, that mother has got the nurturing feelings to advance life. So this is part of the difference of the approach of what I'm using here. But I want to stress that what I'm sharing with you is no good if you're not applying it to your life. If you are, then it's useful. And it's best, the higher the cause is that you're serving. Your first cause is you to get your head right, to get your spirit right, to get yourself more in balance. But the higher cause is bigger than you. My best stuff I wouldn't have. I wouldn't be able to pipe into God's mind if I wasn't doing something higher. And that's where all growth comes from anyway. We're put here to help advance humanity and get closer to God. So when I speak about internalization and personal experience and a methodology that's African-centered, tied to that is the awakening process that we'll be going into deeper as time goes on. And this arises for me from one of the two most important experiences of my life, my awakening experience. I'm reading right now a new book on Malcolm, which is written by a Pulitzer Prize winning author. It's quite good. He's done some new research on Malcolm, leading anyone that knows Malcolm to go back and look at his autobiography. Not that it's wrong, but there are a lot of things missing there, partly caused by Malcolm, but partly caused by just what we didn't know. And so it's an excellent book. And it's also showing how Malcolm's awakening contributed to his own growth and in fact put him on the path to his destiny as a leader and as a creative thinker. So for me, one of the two greatest joys of my life has come from my awakening, and it came from my realization that my education, because then I was in second year of law school, 1963. My awakening came through realizing that my education had been a tissue of lies. Carter G. Woodson said it took him 30 years to overcome the miseducation of Harvard. Fortunately, I didn't go to Harvard. Harvard's much better at brainwashing than state universities. But they had done their job. And so I was a government major. I've said this before, but I want you to get the context for what we're dealing with today. I was a government major, pre-law major, second year of law school. And I've just been elected chair of San Francisco Core, and I'm at the beginning of leading the largest Northern movement, and the only one against economic apartheid, and the only one that defeated an entire power structure. I'm at the beginning of that. And this is the same year I meet Malcolm X, El Haj Malik el-Shabazz, in the summer of 1963. So I entered the movement on the assumption that many of the youth entered the movement, that all we had to do was get our full rights. I was not a revolutionary. I was hardly awake, though I knew some things because I had an awakened family, especially my father. But a lot of his message had not got over to me, just as a lot of Malcolm's father's message had not got over to him, in part because he was killed and his mother was pushed away from him with just a nervous breakdown, put in a mental institution for years. In my case, I was raised in a predominantly white community after living in a Black community for 7 years, the Fillmore. And so all my teachers will write everything white. And I'm getting a message from my father and getting another message. Plus my father's message was conscious. He had undergone experience that I had not undergone, raised in the South. And he had real fire in his belly, and he was at war with the system for good reason. refused to fight in World War II. I think I mentioned this before. And I was in the ROTC and the Marine Reserves, watching John Wayne movies and stuff. You know what I mean? So I entered the movement, as many activists did, on the assumption that all that had to happen was the system needed to be opened up. Blacks needed to get their full rights. And at that point, it was the right to vote. It was the ending of segregation. And in the North, the right to a job, because that was the real struggle then. And I might point out today, if you surveyed Blacks in the average Black community, because when I became chair of CORE in January 1963, I sent my organizers, along with myself, into pool halls, barbershops, beauty parlors, churches, alcoholics on the street, some of whom were good spies for us. They tell us who was sitting in the car with the police and stuff like that. And I said, you're only asking one question. What do you want? Because good leaders, good organizers don't go off of what they want. They go off what the people want. We got only one answer. And I can guarantee you today, if that same survey was carried out, you get the same answer: jobs. This time you'd get good paying jobs, because right now the jobs that are available are not sufficient to take care of a family. And so it's in the midst of that, that as a pre-law student, I'm sitting down getting ready to have lunch at Virginia's restaurant. A sister from Louisiana, a beautiful sister that fed us 2 meals a day for a good 5 years. A full-time organizer, had no money. I wear clothes from the Goodwill store of the rich people in Pacific Heights. That's the elite area in San Francisco. It cost me $20. You know what I mean? I managed to find a roof to live under for 9 years. You know what I mean? With a girlfriend or with my father or wherever. You know what I mean? But no money. I was organizing 9 years, no pay. And that was the best period of my life, by the way. So I'm sitting down to have dinner with my vice chair, Norman Brown. Norman had come out of the first all-Black community in the South, a city that, you know, Blacks organized themselves in Florida, where Zora Neale Hurston came from, Eatonville. And he hadn't seen a white person until he was about 18. I've been around white people all my life. And he spent a lot of time in New York, where he came into a lot of Black nationalism and stuff. And Norman's my friend to this day. He's 2 years older than me. Anytime I need something, hey, Norman, the little guy. And he's a real nice, helpful person, you know? And in fact, many of the people who were following me were older than me. Ain't that funny? I was 21 at that point. So we're sitting down to have lunch, and mine's chicken and macaroni and cheese and all that. And his is oxtails, his favorite lunch. You know what I mean? So over that discussion, I thought I was going to have me some good soul food, and that was going to be it. But what I got was the biggest revelation of my life, because here I am, government major, and Norman Brown is telling me who's really running the government. And I had bought the line. See, you wouldn't now, because it's pretty clear now, but there's other lies your generation will buy. But the lie that a lot in my generation bought was, well, you know, if the system just opened up, everything will be all right. And particularly the activists in the movement, that was their idea. And so Norman is explaining to me while I'm eating that the government's controlled by big business. My father had given me that message, and I didn't get it because it was over my head. He's talking big politics, and I'm a kid. I didn't understand that. But now I'm in the midst of struggle. I'm dealing with corporations, and I'm seeing who runs the politicians. I'm seeing who runs the media. Norman was giving me a message at my level, and that level was telling me who was a real power. What was a power structure? And then this is 1963, and King's campaign, Operation Confrontation, is his best campaign in Birmingham, Alabama. And that's where the term power structure comes out, white power structure. C. Wright Mills had written a book on the power elite. And Lerone Bennett would write a book that came out in 1964 called Negro Mood, later called Black Mood, his best book, only 123 or so pages. And one of his best chapters was the Black establishment, where he talked about the Black power structure that's out there to control Black people. And it is a whole lot more than a lot of people who have been running around here talking about the boule and everything. It is much more sophisticated than that. The Illuminati don't run nothing in this country. And so it was that method, that message that hit me where I was at. I could hear what he was saying. And so he's telling me who my real enemy was. When he gives me this message, my favorite word was then, I know. It was always, I know. Well, in this case, and that's because I was young, but in this case, it was a pure cover up, because this was the oh shit moment. Oh shit. All this stuff I've known is garbage when it comes to the system. I'm a government major. I don't know how the government works. If I don't know that, what else do I not know? I don't know myself. If I don't know my enemy, I don't know myself. This was the beginning of me thinking my first original thoughts, even though I thought I was real smart before. So that was my oh shit moment. And that was a moment where I felt bad. I felt foolish. I was embarrassed, but I was too ashamed to show it. And I didn't tell Norman until years later. He had woke me up, not because I was ashamed of that. I was happy about that. But because at the moment, I was feeling bad because I had fallen for a big lie. And that's what miseducation is. And there are all kinds of big lies. So this is what led me to hit the books. This is what led me to throw out the methodology of miseducation. First of all, through getting the right information. But then secondly, through undergoing a transformation that we now call the sixfold stages to mental freedom. When I was undergoing it, I didn't know what it was. Neither did Malcolm. By the time he had died, he could identify markers for his awakening, but he couldn't tell you the stages because he was too close to it. But he was going through them and in fact ascended to its highest level, revolutionary African consciousness. He would have discovered that later, I'm sure. So that awakening process has been like the key experience in my life, and it is a key thing that I've shared with you in this program. And in going back into our history, this is key reason for the history. One, you need to know your enemy, what's oppressing you right now. But two, you need to know your history so that you know yourself. And today, for the generation of Black youth who are now struggling against the police in this country, in Africa, who are struggling against the violent forces that keep the people down, governments that are armed to the teeth, so a handful of leaders can rip off the goodies, the Caribbean the same way. Wherever we are in the world, Blacks in the UK or in Europe, who are also facing brutal racism, though not as savage as this one, it is still racism. And a lot of it is being nurtured by the United States through their neoliberalism. So now we have Black youth, brown, red, and yellow, and white, going up against the system on the issue of the police. and demanding that police budgets be cut. And that's a good demand. And it's one that the president, while he's adopted a lot of the agendas coming from the left, including Black Lives Matter, including Bernie Sanders and a host of others, this is one he doesn't want to adopt because he's Irish and he's been Mr. Law and Order. He's had to cough up and apologize for throwing a lot of blacks and brown people in prison, but he's still got that cop mentality, that it's only a few bad cops and all the rest of this stuff. So the youth are waking up behind this movement. Going up against the police has been the eye-opener for a lot of the young people in this generation. And so the demands that police budgets be cut, the demand around the movement for Black Lives, a coalition of Black groups, that $700 billion be cut out of the defense budget and put into housing, low-income housing, put into jobs and healthcare and other things. Those are good demands. It's going to be a hard fight. But in the 60s, we succeeded in shifting spending away from the military into social programs and succeeded in shifting public opinion because the majority of whites in this country defended the military just because they were told the Russians were coming. And the Russians saved America's behind in World War II, lost 27 million people, but suddenly they were the great enemy. Right down the street from where I live, the Chinese guy had built this huge house, 5,000 square feet, with a bomb shelter in it. The Russians are going to bomb America, not hardly. And America was not going to invade Russia. Why? Russia had the bomb. America don't invade anywhere with the bomb. Had Saddam Hussein kept his work on the bomb, his country Iraq wouldn't have been invaded. And the same thing with Gaddafi, you know what I mean? So America don't go anywhere where somebody can drop something on them. They got to be able to drop it on them and they can't do it to them. You understand? So the youth are in a movement where they're waking up behind the police and behind their culture, which is a humanistic culture that cares about human life. And that's true as much when it comes to people of color and white youth who have a conscience. So the challenge for the youth today is to understand what it is that moves the police. The challenge for the youth today is to understand that group that rules this country, which is the ruling class, and understand how it works and why it is that even if you get some cuts in police budgets, the police are going to still come down hard on you because they are the line that protects the rich from everybody else. And so the awakening today comes under circumstances similar, but slightly different. How many of the youth who are engaged in struggle know what neoliberalism is? How many of the elders do? The Leo Friedman campaign of putting everything as government that's coming from your tax dollars into private pockets. And that's around the world, not just in this country. And so that's a part of the awakening. So in looking at our African past, and in this case, the topic for today, the Twa Anu founders of Kemet, the world's greatest civilization, Kemet, which was Egypt, understanding racism and how racism works and how it's ingrained into the structure of this system in the US and globally is key to everything else. And that's a part of how we begin to see what's going on and think for ourselves. And when you start to embrace your history and your culture, your past, then you find out it's the key to how you view transformation today. So when we look at our history, historically, how does that help us in a Black Lives Matter movement? Or how does that help us in dealing with the police? Or how does that help us with these low-paying jobs that Blacks are getting in this country, this poverty, this homelessness that a lot of us are facing. And how does that help us when it comes to issues like imprisonment and the high number of Blacks who have been put into prison since drugs have been dropped into our communities and since there have been few jobs to hire our people. So it's important to understand that when you're looking at the origin of humanity, going back 144,000 years ago, to understand how societies worked then and how they work now. And a lot of us are caught up in things are not going to change. One of my favorite songs is "Everything Must Change, Nothing Remains the Same. The young become the old, mysteries they do unfold." One of my favorite spiritual songs is "Change." I'm not what I want to be, but I'm better than I used to be. Change. Change is the nature of life. Standing still and being in a fixed position, that ain't how life works. So if we look at our history, one of the things that we learn about our history is that we actually, until the coming of colonialism and slavery, had societies where there was not extremes between rich and poor. We're talking about Africa. And most of the Europeans who are talking about change, all they have is their models of Europe. They haven't bothered to study a single thing about Africa or Asia or Latin America or Native Americans, except for a few scholars. But we had societies where there were not great differences in wealth, where you didn't have abject poverty. In fact, while I was beginning the rewrite on my current book on Seba, my wife's good friend from Barbados, who is also a retired college professor, sent me a little statement, and it was a European person of the gentry who in the 19th century traveled from one end of Africa to the other. And at this time, this was before colonialism. Africa was free. And he said, "I went from one end of the continent to the other, and I never saw a poor person. I went from one end of the continent to the other, and I never heard of a robbery or a murder or rape or the abuse of women or children." And then he said, this is typical of white people, "These are going to be a hard people to conquer." He didn't have enough sense or enough humanity to say, how could we do that? Oh no, because he didn't want to. He wanted to stick it to his people and stick it to humanity so that his class could get more, you know? And so it's important to know that you had times in history where you didn't have no real poverty. You hear me? Why? They didn't have the idea of land, air, and water being privately owned. Neither did Native Americans, neither did early Asians. And it is a fiendish idea that the staples of life could be put in anybody's possession. Because if the powerful are able to do their will, and they always do, they'll get most of it. It's fiendish that people should pay for water. It's fiendish that people should live in the richest country in the world and not have a roof over their head. And the conflict between Native Americans and European Americans occurred on many levels. And one was when the Europeans started putting fences around their property. And the Native Americans didn't understand that fence. This land's here for everybody, you know? And then fences could cut off a deer from a stream of water, you know? No thought of any of that. So the point is, we're looking at poverty. We've got to eliminate it. You need new models. And some of those new models come from old systems that need to be updated. And when we understand the communal model, which means the land, air, and water is shared, not owned, and your obligation is to leave it in better condition than you receive it, then you understand why your grandparents and some of your parents now, and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents survived, because they shared. they had the communal ethos. They could not, at this point, just get land and share it. They had to buy it. But what they did is they shared their food, they shared their love, they shared their concern. And as a result of that, we were able to thrive. We had the communal ethos. My grandmother, who was poor as 10 church mice, anytime a person came to her door, she had something for them to eat and barely had enough to eat herself. And that's the nature of the communal ethos. That's in you. Your culture's in you. So when we say we didn't lose anything in Africa, guess what? Africa's in you no matter what you want to do with it. And when you know it, you're going to do the right things with it. So we lived in societies where there were no jails. Why? We had a different conception of the human being. We saw the human being as divine. God's within each of us. And you don't lock up God. You're a divinity. And every animal is the same way. I don't go to zoos. I don't want to see no animal locked up. You hear me? How miserable you think it is for a lion to be in a cage, or an elephant, or whatever. Cage, 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 lock up. How inhumane can you get? So you have a movement now. Angela Davis is a part of it. A lot of Black Lives Matter are a part of it. Abolition. They're talking about abolishing prisons. Look at your societies that ran without prisons forever. This is just a short period of time where we've had them. But it was a different conception of a human being. A human being is a divine entity. And if you're a divine entity, you cannot possibly lock up somebody who is divine. That idea is foreign to you. You might send them off somewhere in isolation for punishment. In the case of murder in African societies, there were a number of ways it was dealt with. Sometimes it was capital punishment, but sometimes it was banishment. Sometimes your family had to give up a person and send it to the family that lost a person, along with the other punishment that went to the person that committed the murder, meaning a life for a life. And in this particular case, people are getting life to replace the life they had, which is never the same. You lost your son or daughter or wife or husband or whatever. But the point is, they had conceptions of correction, conceptions that were humane. So when you draw from your past, you can begin to draw from that. We come out of slavery with our humanity intact, scarred, but with our humanity intact, because we came out of societies with a deep sense of caring for each other. And as a result, that was why we did the same thing. So when we understand this, then we have a better understanding of why we've been successful at some things we've done. The Greenwood example, which King James has done a good job of financing the show that'll be on CNN on Greenwood and how that community was bombed and, you know, the Black Wall Street was done in. But Blacks built those communities out of love and out of the culture we created here, which is based on race consciousness and race pride. Banks, grocery stores, movie theaters, all kinds of professionals. And that was sustained by Blacks who had jobs, by the way, very often subservient jobs, but they put that money into building up a Black economy. And then it was bombed, attacked by the National Guard, by the Klan. A lot of Blacks died. But the lesson from that one is, and this is one that was hidden in Malcolm's autobiography, is one of the missing chapters. One of the points he made about economic development is you have to be able to defend what you built. Now, Blacks fought in Greenwood, and they were up against machine guns. I mean, you know, they came in there with some heavy artillery. So that's not an easy thing to do. But we have to be better prepared for that. Whatever you have to be prepared to protect it. And they were, but we need to be better prepared. What's often not noticed is Blacks rebuilt Black Wall Street. And what's often not noticed, I'm sure this series that's coming out or this show that's coming out will show it, is that it's later during the Black Freedom Movement that the city council there comes in and promises Blacks in this area, where you had this Black town, Greenwood, that they were going to run a freeway through it, but they were going to give them another part of town and give them the resources to rebuild there. They ran the freeway through it and didn't give them anything. And that is also the nature of what we face in this country, breaking up Black communities. So if you're going to use your past to change your present, then you better be prepared, if you're not already doing it, to get in the streets and do some fighting. And one of the most difficult battles to win is against any redevelopment agency, because that's where real money is concentrated. And when they come after that, they're coming after that for real wealth, and real power is ganging up on you. And you have to be extremely well organized to defeat that. But those are all things that you can do if you're prepared. So why is it, or what is it that we can learn from the Twa or the Anu, who are the founders of Kemet, or Egypt, the world's greatest civilization, that can help us in empowering ourselves and freeing ourselves today, and not just in this country, but globally? I can tell you that you wouldn't have to ask a European this question, because America is built on the old European model, and it's doing a good job of keeping people down. Every part of America that's formal, its executive system, its judicial system, its military system, its political system, its economic system, they're all European imports, and they're all oppressive. And so for those who oppress you, there's no question, the average day white doesn't know this, but the people that run the system, they know this is what they rely on to keep their foot on your neck. If you're going to get it off, you'd better come up with a better foot. My size 13, which is my foot size, has gone up the behinds of a whole lot of corporations in a collective struggle. Yours needs to too, but you need a vision of what you want to put in its place. And that vision is in part coming out of your past, and in part is what you do with that to make a better future. As your parents say, they want you to be better than them. And so when you draw from that past, it isn't just to reproduce something, it's to make it better. Or as our people would say, mo better. So today, a large sector of Black youth lack the skills and lack the mentality. That is the work ethic, because not having work for a long time, or underground economy work for too long, many of them don't even have the work mentality. You get young Blacks who are skilled barbers, but have trouble consistently coming to a job for work. The first time in my life, I've seen Black barbers having to hire white barbers, because the young Blacks who come in skillful, but after they get their paycheck, they may not show up, or they'll come in with the mentality of telling the boss, who's Black, by the way, how to run his business, how much the chair should cost. And that's because they come up in a couple of generations, they haven't had a father in the house, and they haven't seen a man working. And while they got a skill, they just don't have the ethic for the skill. So part of the reason why we need to draw from this past is we need to know that there's certain things that the older generation has among Blacks that the younger generation needs. And because of the force of drugs and everything else, it's driven a wedge between the young and the old. And as a result, a lot of the old are afraid to deal with some of the young. And a lot of the young have too much of the attitude, ain't nothing some old person can teach me. You understand? So their ears are not open. And so what we need is, in the Black community, part of learning from our past, in this case, our elders who are our past, is basic building skills that elders have, electrical skills, plumbing skills, and master computer technology. One of my former students, Alton, he's a master computer man. He has set up extensive courses in the Hunters Point, training young Black males, many of whom have criminal records, in the whole gamut of computer technology, free. He's trained them in this. This is what we need to be doing on a mass level, you know? So part of the transmission is from generation to generation. We have a break where we used to pass those on. Now, for a variety of reasons that I call a choice between two cultures, they're not being passed on. And therefore, Black families are at the level of 29% two-parent households. That's caused by jobs being taken away and other things, but it's also caused by breakdowns in the Black community. If you call your neighborhood a hood and you think gangsterism is the way to go, well, it is a way to go. Straight to lockup or death, you know, or just nothing. So we need to draw from the past to have ideas for constructing just societies. And then we need to draw from the wisdom of our elders who can help us in terms of negotiating this reality. I'm living in a house built by a master Black builder. Took him a whole year to build this house. It's the best built house in this whole area. And he lived in it for 23 years. I've been in it now 28. You understand? Master builder. He did things that none of the other builders knew to do or would do. And we got that skill in the Black community. And before it's gone, it needs to be transferred. And by the way, I'm gonna be working on some stuff like that. So by knowing that Black people gave birth to the world's greatest civilization, and by knowing how they did it, we can approach business and movements for freedom as nation building projects. Because that's what we are. We're a nation within a nation. Most of us don't know it. We're a cultural nation. And when we operate as one, and with higher grades of unity than any other group in this country, when we operate, if you know our history. And so we need to approach what we're doing in our community as nation building, taking on projects that deal with whole communities. So one of the important things that we as Black folks need to know is that the founders and the people who created the world's greatest civilization in the world, both pre-dynastic and dynastic, were Black. That's important to know. Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop, the greatest historian on ancient Kemet in a specific area, which is extremely important, the area of Kemetology. He is the father of this thought because he dedicated his life to proving one thing, that the Kemites were Black. Now, no other people would have to dedicate their lives to this. How many Chinese would have to dedicate their lives to proving that Chinese was Asian or yellow? You understand? How many people would have to dedicate their lives to proving that Europe was white, even though it built itself on an African foundation? How many? But it was necessary that that work be done. And he brought the excellence of a physicist, linguist, and historian, and a former boxer, by the way. Sheikh Anta Diop was a boxer as a younger man. And so he laid that foundation that enables us now to go to another level. And according to Diop, he makes this point that there's a law called Glogger's, G-L-O-G-E-R-S law. And this law applies to human beings. And it asserts that human beings who evolve in a warm, humid climate will secrete a Black pigment called melanin. Therefore, for mankind who originated, and we're talking the Twa, the Batwa, we're talking African people who originated in the tropics around the latitude of the Great Lakes region, and that is the region where the Biaka Twa come from. And then, of course, the Kung or the San people in the Kalahari Desert and other parts of Africa as well, they were bound to be Black or of dark pigmentation. This is extremely important. And most of humanity in its beginning are shades of that until we hit the Ice Age and we have the mutation of Grimaldi man who leaves Africa, goes into Europe, and then experiences the Ice Age, and we see the mutation to white. So the area of the Great Lakes is near the Congo, where the Biakatua, who are one of two of the world's first human beings, come 144,000 years ago. It is these people that give birth to humanity. And during what's called the Upper Paleolithic, now these are technical terms, but Paleolithic. Paleolithic means the age, the Stone Age, the Stone Age. And this is in the area of approximately 10,000 BC. It's during this period that you have migrations down the Nile, because when you go to Kemet, you're going down, where African people, starting with the Twa, migrate from their homelands from near the Great Lakes regions along the Nile into Kemet. And so these migrations, so just as last week I was dealing with the way in which the Twa impacted Niger Congo Bantu people, this is new stuff, civilized them. They're going to do the same thing in Kemet. And when they move out of Africa, the same thing in China, the same thing in India, the same thing in Japan, the same thing in the Philippines. And they're the first people to migrate, as Brother Imhotep, who's written a book on Blacks in America. These San people are the first people to migrate into the Americas and in specifically the United States, which I'm not dealing with today. So Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop notes that the Kemetic or Egyptian population was Black from the pre-dynastic period, the epoch that starts 10,000 BC to its end, predominantly Black by its end, but Black throughout. When Herodotus goes to Kemet after the fall, Blacks fall from power, it's still a Black civilization. And that's a matter of fact observation of his. You only have a short period of white rule in northeastern Kemet for 150 years, the Hyksos. They come in at 13th dynasty and are thrown out by the end of the 17th. That's only northeastern Kemet. The rest of that, even then, during a period of invasion, is Black. And here I'm talking about pre-dynastic. We're talking about the whole period. It's Black. And the name of the country, KMT, is portrayed in their writing, which is called Medu-Neter, which is God speak, and Medu-Nefer, which is the speech of humans that approximate God. It is portrayed as a Black-skinned person, charcoal Black, KMT. So make no mistake about it. Last week, I presented historical evidence on the fact that the Twa were the civilizers of the larger Africans in the Niger-Congo Bantu region of Central Africa. They play the same civilizing role in Kemet. And there's a pattern to this civilization that I'm not going to go into today, that I will go into in another phase, to how the civilization went down. But here I'm showing their role in creating Kemetic civilization, laying the whole foundation for what we call Kemet or ancient Egypt. And a lot of this is new. By the way, you go into the integration trap. I have a chapter on this, but I've done a lot more research since then. So what we see then is Kemetic civilization. Those who deal with dynastic Kemet usually start with 3200 or 3100, and some would argue 3300 BC. That is when they call this the unified period where Kemet is generally studied. But the pre-dynastic period is generally neglected. I work on the stuff that hasn't been worked on, because if someone's done a good job, there's no point in covering that again. And I build on the work that others have done. So my book, The Integration Trap, Generation Gap Caused by a Choice Between Two Cultures, in chapter 4 provides the documentation for this presentation, but I stress I've done a lot more research since then. And so this is foundational, what's in this chapter, but there's a lot more. Most historians who study Kemet focus their attention, as I said before, on dynastic Kemet. And there is generally a debate, especially among African and African-American historians, over what was the greatest historical period of dynastic Kemet, but of Kemet in general, because generally for them, dynastic Kemet is all there is. They know something about pre-dynastic, and so this debate is over which is the greatest period, dynastic or pre-dynastic. So this is a debate that we had. It wasn't no big debate. We didn't have panels on, but we would have discussion. So John Henry Clark, Asa Hilliard, one of our great scholars, had an endowed chair at Georgia State, had been dean of the College of Education at San Francisco State, and played a very important role in me getting tenured, a beautiful brother. The speech that I have up on African-American culture, I acknowledge him in the beginning. He came in to hear that speech, and I made sure that my cinematographer, I told him, get some good pictures of Asa. He was one beautiful person. And Jacob Carruthers and Doc Ben. Joseph Ben Yakinen, who is one of our pioneering historians. They all have this discussion. What's the greatest period in Kemetic civilization? John Henry Clark would say 25th dynasty. It was Kemet's, or Egypt's, greatest walk and the last walk in the sun. That was his, you know. Asa and Doc Ben, they thought the 18th dynasty was the greatest dynasty, because this is the rise of imperial power. This is what Sheikh Anta Diop called defensive imperialism. Kemet had been conquered in the Northeast for 150 years by a group of people called Hyksos. They had been thrown out by the end of the 17th dynasty. And so Sheikh Anta Diop correctly observes that Kemet entered a period of defensive imperialism. They carried out attacks against those areas that had invaded them. And one of them was the area that today we would call Palestine. So that's their position. And then we know the 3rd and 4th dynasty is a great period of pyramid building, great period. But I always argue, and I'm gonna present some convincing evidence for this here. It's pre-dynastic Kemet. Guess why? Historians say this: with the first dynasty, whatever date you give it, 3100 BC, 32 or 33 BC, they all say this. At its start, that is dynastic Kemet, it's in decline, because all that was Kemet was created before 31, 32, or 3300 BC, whatever date you want to pick. All the elements of civilization had been created in pre-dynastic Kemet. So I'm the Twa man, baby, the Anu man. And I look at all the other history too. It's important. And I'm not focused just on Kemet, but I love truth and justice more than anything. I'm a revolutionary. Of all the African-centered scholars, I'm the only one. Only one. You understand? That's what Obenga said of me. I'm saying I'm not claiming that mount. I'd like some company. You want to radicalize, get radicalized, join the crowd of one. Let's have 3 or 4 or 10 or 50. I don't want to be by myself. So why pre-dynastic Kemet? because everything that's Kemet was created during this particular time. And so how do we neglect? It's kind of like looking at the child, but not checking out the mother, not checking out the father or the grandparents or the culture that they came out of. You know what I mean? You're checking the fruit, but not the root. Hey, baby, I want to get into the root. You hear me? So this is going to be an excursion into depth, baby, roots. And what you did yesterday, you can do even more tomorrow, believe it or not. So what I'd say is that while you had all of these other great periods of Kemetic civilization, it's essential that we really look at this pre-dynastic period and really understand it. Now, historians generally acknowledge, because many of them have been too lazy to study pre-dynastic Kemet, that the authority on this is generally considered to be a person named Flinders Petrie, P-E-T-R-I-E. Flinders Petrie is a French historian of the 19th century. And he accumulated a lot of materials. I'll show you some of them on pre-dynastic Kemet, and then tried to put himself in the position of being the authority on pre-dynastic Kemet. He had a lot of artifacts at his disposal. It would depend upon which period of pre-dynastic history we're talking about, which artifacts he had in his possession. But my research clearly shows that Petrie's conclusions were, for the most part, pure colonial propaganda, falsely claiming that the pottery of pre-dynastic Kemet was a Spanish or German Neolithic, which is Neolithic, that refers to agriculture. So it's the early period of agriculture. This is, and by the way, Anu, which I'm going to get into in a minute, they're largely of the agrarian background. They're the ones that innovated agriculture, though they're in this area of the Nile even before agriculture. So we're going to talk about both. So Petrie tries to take the pottery that he finds, and he's got quite a bit to look at in pre-dynastic Kemet during this early agricultural period, as pottery that comes from Spain or Germany. This is 9,000 BC and later. Now, he also wants to assert that the founders, because his aim is to really show that Blacks didn't found Kemet, you understand? But he's got a real problem, because even he has to say they did, but he says they didn't, you understand? That's the nature of racist logic. It's psychopathic, you know what I mean? It's inconsistent, it's all over the place. So it's not easy to tear it apart, you know? So Petrie examines what historians call, there's a period that they call the Badarian, B-A-D-A-R-I-A-N. You should be taking notes whenever I'm doing stuff. I put a lot of time into this. So if you think you're just absorbing this, you need to be taking notes and go back and watch these DVDs again and take more notes. The Badarian period, B-A-D-A-R-I-A-N, starts around 7,500 BC. Now, he goes on to assert that the Badarian civilization was originated by a certain group of people from India. But he makes it clear, not the Dravidians. See, Dravidians are Black. So he can't be, but they're the ancient people in India. So along with the Chua, as I pointed out last week, they're the first people in India. But then after that, the Dravidians are a little taller. Some of them have straight hair, some don't. They're the ones that founded and created this civilization of India. But he says, but not them. He calls them early Indian, but he doesn't say most ancient. So what's he saying there? He's saying that the Aryan who conquered India, and we know the period of conquest was the second or third millennium BC, 2000, 3000 BC, that these people are supposed to have conquered or founded a civilization 7,500 BC or 10,000 BC. Huh? How could they do that when they weren't around? This is what you call tricky logic, pure jive. So this is his evidence for, or his attempt to take pottery and other things I'm going to show you in a minute, and to ascribe their authorship, their creativity to someone else, in this case, early Indian Aryans. Wouldn't it be interesting that, so these are the people, according to him, who founded Kemet. These people took a caste system that was based on occupation that you could find in certain parts of Africa. Your father's this and you're that, and you could be or not be. And then they turned it into a race system called Barner, color. Now, if they are the founders of Kemet, why don't you see that? And if you did see that, you'd see one of the most horrendous civilizations in the history of the world. That didn't happen, but that's his story. So he's got Aryans in India before there were Aryans who had ever done anything. You know what I mean? They didn't go back that far. They're the last to civilize. Whites are the last to civilize. And that's a debatable question. Was it civilization? Some historians have said the idea of Western civilization is a novel idea, because to be civilized is to be civil. You got any societies like that? Really, So according to Petrie, therefore, the pottery of Kemet is supposed to be a pottery that is coming out of a non-African source. Yet I'll show you some pictures of the pottery here. See here, the pottery on the side. That pottery on the top resembles the kind of pottery that you find all over Africa. And if you look on the bottom, you'll see a natural comb. You tell me, since when have white people used a natural comb? And then on the other side, you see all these flint stones. Those are the early stone that was used for any kind of work that they could do during the Stone Age. And this again was African. And these are the Africans who migrate from the Mountain of the Moon area, Great Lakes region, into Kemet. So this is the propaganda. So why is it important to know these historical roots and to know that Blacks founded Kemet, and in this particular case, Anu, Black people, in this case, who are Twa. Flinders Petrie's lied when he said that in pre-dynastic Kemet, there were 7 races, because the few and only a very few non-Blacks have been found in pre-dynastic Kemet, and virtually all of them are portrayed in a servile position, that is, as captives, with their hands behind their backs and bound. Only a few were infiltrators. Now, what do the Twa say about the founding of Kemet? And then what does the evidence show? The Twa say that they were the founders of what today the world calls Kemet or Egypt. Two authors, an author named Alex Pelly and Jean Halle, in a book called Pygmy Kitabu, which means Book of the Pygmies. We know that's not a respectful term, but they quote from the Twa, who say, quoting them, their ancestors anciently fled from a paradise homeland called Kimi, K-I-M-I. Kimi, you hear me? Now that sounds a whole lot like Kemet. According to the Twa, in this paradise, they smelted metals, which we know they started doing well before moving into Kemet. They are the authors of the smelting of iron. And by the way, Sheikh Anta Diop has found some iron tools in some of the pyramids. And when he was in the Cairo Museum, looking at one of the chairs of the pharaoh, he noted iron holding up the chairs. And so the tour guide admitted, yeah, that's iron. When he inquired into the Cairo Museum on, was that iron recently used to repair the chairs, or was it used in its original construction? The person in charge of the Antiquities Museum, who's Arab, refused to answer. 2 letters, he didn't get an answer. But the Kemites, through the Twa or the Anu, had worked in iron. They had learned iron smelting. So according to the Twa, they said they smelted iron, dwelt in great villages or cities. We're going to see in a minute what kind of cities they lived in. They practiced agriculture. They innovated it. And animal husbandry. They sailed on boats, and I'll show you a few of the boats that were used in pre-dynastic Kemet. They manufactured pottery. I've just shown you some. And in general, lived in an exceedingly high level of material technology. That's what they said. And then they decided to quit it. But I'm going to tell you, they were run out. The dynastic Kemites took over. These were taller Africans and ran them out. But what they did is they took the civilization that they had erected and continued it thereafter. So it's interesting that Petrie and most historians, African and European, have neglected the observation of the Greek historian Herodotus on pre-dynastic Kemet. Now, the Greeks called him the father of history. There's no way he can be the father of history. The Kemites, when they entertained the Greeks, that when the Greeks came to their society, their priests told them they were children, immature, meaning as a society, they had not evolved over enough time to do much of anything. And so Herodotus couldn't be the father of world history, certainly not African history, and never claimed to be. But that was a claim that many historians assert for him. Herodotus was good as a historian because he comes during a period in which this idea of racial superiority was not in the air, except in India at that time. And so it was a matter of fact recognition that high civilizations in the world were Black, and particularly the highest in Kemet was Black. And we note that one of the observations of Herodotus that most African historians use to make the argument that Kemet was Black is his Colchin argument. This was a colony set up by the Kemites, area called Colchin, or the Colchis people. And his observation of these people was, for they were like the Egyptians, they had black skin and woolly hair. Then he went on to say, because that's a normal observation, most civilizations were Black. And so he wanted to provide convincing proof. So he said they practiced circumcision, because that was a practice that not all Africans practiced, and certainly whites and many Asians did not practice. So the point is, he was reliable on that, and he was observing that Kemet was Black after Blacks had lost power. That's when he traveled in Kemet. So, and the other quality of Herodotus that's important is generally when he reported on something, it was something he observed. And when he didn't observe it, he would say, I didn't see this, but I was told that. And therefore saying he's not sure if it's true or not. And so when the European historians come along to paint Kemet white or in the spirit of Asia, according to Hegel, when they're challenged by the simple fact that the eyewitnesses, starting with the Kemites themselves, but then others, including the Greeks, say that they were Black, then these arrogant whites will say they're ill-informed. Someone who comes along a couple of thousand years later knows more than the eyewitness that was observing things at that time and knows more than the people themselves. Give me a break. So when we look at Herodotus, we also note that Herodotus had made the observation that all the gods of Greece, except for Mercury, had come to them by way of Kemet, Mercury. And Mercury came to them through the founding people of Greece called Pelagians, Pelagians. These were Black people who were in Greece prior to the Greeks coming in. These Black people were heavily influenced by Kemet, since it was the most advanced civilization at its time. And these Pelagians placed women on a very high level. And this is the period that the Greeks referred to as a period where women, had a say-so in things. This is before the Aryan, who moves into Greece, takes over. But they become under the sway of Kemet as well, but their foundation is now Aryan. So on page 116 of Herodotus' book on history, he makes another observation, and this again shows his accuracy. I'm presenting this to show accuracy, but also to show you some of the contributions that Kemet made to ancient history. He made this observation. He said that when, and I quote him now, the Nile carried away a portion of a man's lot, his land, he appeared before the king, that is the Pharaoh, and related what happened. Upon which the king sent persons to examine and determine by measurement the exact extent of the loss, giving the person new land equal to the land lost. Now, this is very important, his observation after this. He says, from this practice, I think geometry came to be known in Egypt, whence it passed to Greece. In other words, he's saying what all honest historians acknowledge now, geometry was invented by the Kemites, by the Egyptians. And a measurement of lost land was one reason. But European historians, and then they pass this on to the Greeks. But what European historians again do with the colonial mentality is try and say that the Greeks had a scientific approach to geometry, while they don't concede this, but I would say the originators were scattered in piecemeal in their idea of geometry. I was talking to Dr. Theophilo Benga day before yesterday, 2.5-hour conversation. I mentioned it before. And I'm also interviewing him because he's one of the 6 masters that I'm laying out in my book on Seba. And I interviewed him for 18 hours about 23, 24 years ago on the masters in his life, in his formative period, masters in his life, in his creative, what we call improvisational, the Dogon call Boloso. This book I'm writing now shifts pedagogy in 3 different ways. The whiteboard system's finished. You hear me? Finished. What I didn't interview him on was the highest level. Sodaya, which is the clear word in the Dogon system, innovation in ours. Not all masters reach this level. Only 2% in any field occupy this realm. And so one of Dr. Obenga's areas is mathematics and its application to history. That's just one. I was interviewing him on that because most of his books are in French. So I haven't read his books on that. But he was making observations about Kemetic geometry. He was talking about how, first of all, it was very symbolic. He said that, you know, when you saw a bowl, the bowl was symbolic of an arc, and it was making a symbolic statement about geometrical measurement. He was talking about how the Kemites saw geometry as being tied to the air, tied to nature. And he made this observation. The pyramids are constructed in an area that has a lot of earthquakes. There hasn't been a crack in a pyramid from an earthquake in Kemet. That's how precise the Kemites were with mathematics, in this particular case, geometry. And so again, Herodotus is told certain things and draws certain conclusions, and they prove to be true. Now, getting into the pharaonic system in ancient Kemet and the role of the Anu in terms of creating the pharaonic system, the pharaoh, which was a term for house of life. It was the ruler of Kemet. And this institution was created in pre-dynastic Kemet. So when Herodotus traveled throughout Kemet, he questioned the record keepers of Kemetic history. These were the priests. And he questioned them on the history of Kemet, its whole history, including especially pre-dynastic Kemet. Now, this is very important because we note that during the Stone Age, you have this migration out of the headwaters of, out of the central part of Africa, where the Congolese, the Biakachois come from, into the Nile. And so that's around 10,000 BC, and that's during the Stone Age. And so when he's questioning these priests, he's told, and these are the chief priests who are giving him information, they inform him that from the first pharaoh or king of Kemet in pre-dynastic Kemet up until the end, it was a 10,000 year period of history, 10,000. This goes back and confirms this period of the early migration period into Kemet. But then again, he's an eyewitness. He's able to, in Thebes, be conducted by the high priest in Thebes into one of their great temples. An earlier Greek historian by the name of Ecoptasis had been able to do the thing much earlier, that is to go into the temple. In this particular case, it was the priest of what the Greeks called Jupiter, allowed Herodotus to do the same thing. So he goes into the inner sanctuary, and it's a spacious chamber. And in this spacious chamber are colossal statues, wooden statues. And they are the statues of chief priests of Kemet, going back to its beginning, with exact replicas of those priests, because that's how they did the carvings then. And again, what the high priests were able to show by showing him every single high priest who served a particular pharaoh. So the measurement or the time period for these high priests were during the period of a particular pharaoh's rule. And so this was a time marker, again, for the length of Kemetic history and its origin in terms of pharaonic rule. And again, by the count of the number of priests that they had on display, wood carvings in their exact replica, goes back 10,000 years, 10,000 BC. Historians have not looked at this one. I wonder why, black or white. So the historical evidence for the Twa ruling Kemet as pharaohs, and thereby creating all the elements of civilization, is what I want to get into now. The name Anu designates the Twa, who ruled Kemet from the Paleolithic age on up. We have little evidence for this period except stone tools. I showed you some of those a minute ago. And those obviously were used for digging and probably for weapons as well. And various other instruments for agriculture and whatnot. The soil of Kemet is so rich, you didn't have to do much to work the soil to bring in a crop. So what the Twa say when they say that they found this paradise that they called Kemi, meaning Kemet, they said they made pottery. And during the Vidarian period, which was 7,000 BC, they lived in a place called Ayut, A-Y-U-T, on the east bank of the Nile. And they made pottery here through what they called kiln, K-I-L-N, kiln firing, and then glazing, fairly advanced system. I showed you some of the pottery. There's more pictures here. These pottery designs are found all over Africa. And another feature of Twa carvings and stuff is a feature that had to do with physiognomy. And so you have some carvings here of obviously Black women, the anatomy of Black women. And this is one that's hard to miss. See right up there. The big behind. That's an African woman, you know what I mean? Petrie tried to say they were slaves. They didn't have slaves until after the 18th dynasty. After they kicked out the Hyksos, they kept some as slaves, and some became mercenaries in the army. So the Anu designated themselves by 3 vertical pillars. That ad that you saw up here on the top, you see 3 vertical pillars there. That meant Anu. So you can see these 3 vertical pillars that I just showed you in the cover of my book. Wherever the Anu were, you knew they were there by those 3 pillars that announced who they were. Now, Sheikh Anta Diop made the very important point that the Anu were named after their common ancestor. And guess who that was? Ani. Who was Ani? That was Asar, Osiris, because Asar is the ancestor of pre-dynastic Kemet. He's the ancestor of dynastic Kemet. He's, of course, symbolic of the life, death, rebirth cycle. But he was actually a real person. His head was found in a jar in Abydos. I have a picture of him. This is a picture of Asar. Check him out. Big nose. See those eyes? Almost spooky. He's holding the scepters of authority, and the crown he's wearing is the crown of pre-dynastic Kemet, lower and upper Kemet, but pre-dynastic Kemet. This is an exact portrayal of Asar, by the way. Done the same way that the portrayals were done of the priest that Herodotus viewed the effigies of in wooden statues. And this looks like it's a wooden statue as well. So the Anu named themselves after their founding ancestor, Ani, who was Asar, or the Greeks called him Osiris. He was also called Asar Ani or Osiris Ani. And of course, this is a custom of African people that the founder of the civilization is often the ruler, number one, and is the source of everything, along with his wife, Aset, Isis. This is extremely important. You hear me? Extremely important. Asar was Anu. He was one of the little guys. You hear me? As God is no thing and everything, you understand? That's the source right there. And we know how ancestors work with African people. He was the founding ancestor of Kemetic civilization. Many historians treat him as a god, which he became, but they then disregard him as being a man. Because we know in African spirit systems, great spirits could either be spirits who were with God from the beginning, or they could be human beings who achieve so much that over a period of time, they're deified into being gods. Asar was the second type. And what a second type. Founded a civilization mirrored after God and mirrored after heaven. Not to say, and I'm a revolutionary, not to say that Kemet was all paradise. No, it wasn't. They had periods of oppression. They had some pharaohs that were no good. They had uprisings between the 6th and the 11th dynasty, the first intermediate period, because oppression had fallen on the land. So I'm not here to romanticize Kemet. I don't know any of that happening in pre-dynastic Kemet, but we don't have enough evidence to know all the details of everything that happened in pre-dynastic Kemet. And Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop notes that Asar's head was found in a jar in Abydos, along with his likeness that you've just seen. You have the remnants of his remains. Now, a French historian, his name is Aminalou, lists the historic extent of pre-dynastic Anu civilization. And he notes, and this is real important, that pre-dynastic Anu civilization covered southern Egypt and Nubia. Nubia was a part of pre-dynastic Kemetic civilization. And we know that some finds have been made at a site called Quetzal, and it shows about 300 years before the first dynasty, which is 3300 BC. They show here also the presence of the pharaohs that, ruled Anu civilization, because the people of this era, of this area, Nubia, these are blue-black people. Nubia was also the source of gold for Kemet. They were Anu. Now, I pointed out before, according to the Twa stories, they lived in towns. They sailed on boats. Well, actually, the historical evidence shows that the Anu lived in fortified towns or villages. And they built them along the length of the Nile. We know the names of the towns because each of these towns had the 3 registers, vertical registers, Anu. And so one town was called A&T. Historians note it or call it Esneh, E-S-N-E-H, E-S-N-E-H. And then another town, notice how many times they put their name in it. Another town was called On, A-N, or it was also known Southern O-N, Southern On. Also known as Hermonthis, Hermonthis, Hermonthis. The third is commonly known, Dendera, which was the traditional birthplace of Isis and Aset. And then another town called Tinis, T-I-N-I-S. And then a town called the Northern On, or we know it as Heliopolis. Heliopolis. These were the towns that were Anu, central to the Anu civilization. Now, in 2002, when I was writing the integration trap, generation gap caused by choice between 2 cultures, I was writing chapter 4, which is entitled The Twa, the Anu, Founders of Pre-Dynastic Kemet. And I was working on the most important piece of evidence that's found that proves the Anu were the authors of the pharaonic system. And that's this picture. This is thousands of years old. And by the way, the original color was green. I put it in this color. I preferred this color, but you need to know it was actually green, the actual carving here. And I'm going to go into the meaning of this in a minute. So I'm working on this very important piece of historical evidence showing the Anu as the founders of pre-dynastic Kemet. The founders of the pharaonic system. Now, Sheikh Anta Diop knew this. And in fact, when Diop and Obenga made their arguments against all the major scholars in the world at the UNESCO conference in the middle 70s, and defeated all of them on the question of who they were, that they were Black. The reporter for the conference said that of all the presenters, there was only 2 presenting the Black side, Diop and Obenga. He brought his best student. They said of all the presenters, only 2 came prepared. Some of them were their former teachers. They kicked their behind. You understand? And the central argument they made for the Blackness of Kemet was Anu. Here, source of pharaonic civilization. They made many more arguments, and Obenga made the linguistic arguments. That shows the trust that Sheikh Anta Diop had in him. And Obenga has nothing but the highest reverence for Sheikh Anta Diop, the beautiful, humble man, brilliant man. So Diop knew about Anu, but he wasn't concerned about studying their system or anything because his mission was to prove that Kemet was Black. That was his mission in life. It was a monumental mission. It took forever for him to get a PhD because of his stance. He was going up against the whole world of white intellectual racist scholarship and defeated them. And that's a monumental achievement. We call Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop the pharaoh of ancient Kemetic knowledge. he wouldn't call himself that, but he certainly deserves that title. So by clearing the way on the question of who the ancient Kemites were, Dr. Diop cleared the way for people like Theophile Obenga, myself, and many others to then look at the civilization, not only of Kemet, but of Africa, but the civilization of Kemet as well, its culture, its philosophy, its spirit system that people call religion, technology, its scientific, mathematical, astrophysics systems, its family systems, its political and economic systems, and much more. Architecture, which by the way was a architecture tied to astronomy. What kind of people build according to the stars, locating pyramids along the meridian of stars. Something we'll go into at another time. So we can do this work because Diop opened the way for this study. And so for me, my heart goes with the Twa and research in areas that have been neglected. So my focus is on pre-dynastic Kemet, and I'm following the beautiful light that gave me the vision for the just societies, showing me it was the Kemites, the Twa. And then that leads me to looking at the Twa role in founding world civilization, African civilization, and then its apex, ancient Kemet. So that's my focus, though I study the Kemetic history. And my interest is in Africa in general, not just in one part, but this is an important part. So when I'm working on this fourth chapter on Kemet for the integration track, I had reason to question anything that this author, Petrie, had to say about Kemet. And I could see where his propaganda was coming from. He wasn't given real history in his interpretations. He was trying to whitenize it. It was clear, I'm not a linguist. And so whatever I'm not, I draw on the experts. And there are only a few that I would draw on and ask them to do this. And so Obenga is an expert in language. He's a linguist himself. When we hired him, spoke and still speaks 10 languages. His mother had a gift with language, which by the way is common with African people. And so linguistics is one of Obenga's specialties. And what I like about Obenga is he's very, very precise. He's been working on a book on the pharaohs. It's now 1,000 pages long, and he's still tinkering with it, because it's not just right. That's Obenga. He stayed at my house for 4 months. I was on this computer I'm on now. The desk behind me, he was on that using a typewriter because Obenga used a typewriter. And he was working on this same book then, you know what I mean? This was the end of the 90s when he came into our department. And I mentioned this before we went to hire him, I was at John Henry Clark's house, my last interview with him on the book that I'm doing now on the Masters in His Life with Leonard Jeffries. Jeffries tells me Obenga's looking for a job. I asked John, should we hire him? That was just to be respectful to an elder. It's kind of like asking a physics department, you're going to hire Einstein? You know what I mean? Oh. He said, yes, if he wants to. I get on the phone and call Wade Nobles, Dr. Wade Nobles. He was then chairing, I was in charge of the hiring committee. I had chaired the department for 12 years before. And I said, Benga's looking for a job. I give him all the reasons why we should hire him. He said, I don't need any reason, get him out here. And we hired him. And then he tells me, I told you this before, I got to say it again. He said, before he actually got hired, Obenga's about as political as my dead cat, which was my ex-wife's cat. I'm not into cats, but I respect them. But I had to keep this cat. And, Obenga ain't very political, but he is political on this. He says, I'm in a lot of demand. I need money, M-O-N-E-Y, dead presidents. I'm in demand. No, he wasn't. because the Eurocentric scholars are afraid of him. And the African-centered ones had only hired him as a lecturer. But I went for it and I told my dean, he's the top of the food chain. He's the best in the world. Has written 17, in this book now he's finishing is his 18th books, 10 languages. Best on ancient Egypt. We got to give him more money than anybody's ever been paid before. And I already kicked the president's behind. He tried to wipe us out. I kicked his butt, but I have a rule. I treat my enemies with respect. He was eating out of my hands. I was getting all kinds of resources from him. So we got Obenga the highest pay that anybody at his level had got. And that angered some people in my college. And I just say some careers got cut short because if one person of another ethnic group, if you're putting down our best, your career is finished. You ain't getting no higher. I will block you. And I did it. You know what I mean? So Obenga stayed in my house for 4 months. And then after that, he went out. And so I got to see his work. I got stacks of files of Obenga's works, great works. So I decided to take me, the best analysts on Medu Neter, and to interpret Petrie's interpretation of this scene. This is Medu Neter here. And so what did it mean? And according to Petrie, he said, this right here, you see a little official, left foot forward, that means royalty. Left hand holding a staff, that's a staff of authority. The staff of authority, as Dr. Jacob Carruthers pointed out, is also symbolic of Medu Neter or Medu Neter, Medu Nefer, the language of Kemet, authoritative utterance. In other words, it's symbolic of speech associated with elders or wisdom, of course, that comes from God. So this is a figure that you see on the top, 3 vertical registers. That means Anu. And then right across his face, you see this animal with 2 ears. That's Set, S-E-T. Now what's important, in dynastic Kemet, Horus was the netter or the symbol for Pharaoh. That was the son of Asar, symbolized by the hawk. But in pre-dynastic Kemet, Set was. And so that's very important. So according to Petrie, his translation of this figure, this Medu Neter was, I quote him, portrait of a chief Terra Neter, T-E-R-A-N-E-T-E-R. He's saying that's the name of this person, Terra Neter. Preceding his name, given on this earliest of visiting cards, that's what they're called in this cover here, is what he translates the Medu Neter to mean, palace of the Anu, A-N-U, in Hemen, H-E-M-E-N, city, Terra Neter. This is Petrie's translation of this Medu Neter script. So Obenga, who is very precise, I gave him this and asked him to translate this. So I'm going to read what Obenga said this actually meant. Obenga said, when Petrie says in Hemen city, Hemen is the name of a city, but Petrie says himself that Hemen was the name of the god, 13 miles south of Luxor. This is a contradiction. Yeah, I guess so. It can't be both. It's either a city or a god. Which one is it? Or is it either one? Obenga goes on to explain that Petrie's interpretation that Terra Neter, T-E-R-A-N-E-T-E-R, is the name of a chief. So this figure that you've just seen with his left foot forward is supposed to be, according to Petrie, Lord Terra Neter. Obenga said this poses a problem because the word netter or God is almost never included in a proper name, even royal names. So he's saying this figure cannot possibly have the name Terra Netter. Obenga sums up Petrie's interpretation with the following conclusion. Palace of the Anu in Hemen city, Hemen city. Terra Netter means what exactly? The name Terra Netter is not in apposition with Palace of the Anu. Therefore, Petrie's translation is not clear at all. So he's saying he's confusing the name. It can't be the proper name, and treating it in opposition to the palace. This doesn't make sense. So this is Obenga's translation, and he takes the sentence apart and shows you what each word means so that you can see there's a basis for his translation. So this is what this picture on the cover means. The one with his left foot forward, the little one, is the great ones of the palace and the city of the god Hemen, who show respect for the god that is the king of Kemet. In other words, this little man is not Terra Netter, he's a great one. And by the way, what an understatement. What they did, great one, yeah. Muhammad Ali said, I'm the greatest before he knocked anybody out of consequence. He was a 3-time Golden Glove Award winner. He had won the Olympics gold, but he hadn't established that. He was saying, I'm the greatest, and proved it, at least as a heavyweight. But show enough, great one, you better believe it. You hear me? So he's saying that this isn't no Terra Netter. He said, this is a great one. He's in the palace and the city of the god. Now, this is real important. And the city of Hemen, who show respect for the god. And who is that god? It is the god, it is the pharaoh of Kemet. And then he breaks it down and he shows 3 registers. That means great ones. That was the name derived from Ani of Anu, great ones. That's the title for their people as well, their civilization. And then the other terms, HWT means palace or temple, HMN, the god, and TR, to worship, and NTR, God. So this is not a god, Terra Netter. This is a great one who has come to worship the god, who is off that little animal figure there, Set, who is symbolic of Pharaoh. Pharaoh being considered God. This is the clearest evidence, and it is the primary evidence, along with everything else I've presented, of the Anu origin of pharaonic civilization. And this is key. These little people started this civilization and ran it up to 3132 or 3300 BC. And they created all the elements of Kemetic civilization. And I want to quote this. This is historical record. Again, the historian Amelinu observes that, and I quote him, "These Anu were agricultural people, raising cattle on a large scale along the Nile, shutting themselves up in walled cities for defensive purposes," what we've just shown. To these people, now listen to this, we can attribute, without fear of error, the most ancient Egyptian books, the Book of the Dead, or properly the Book of Coming Forth by Day, the texts of the pyramids. Consequently, all of the myths or religious teachings come from the Anu. I would add, almost all the philosophical systems then known and still called Egyptian. They evidently knew the crafts necessary for civilization and were familiar with the tools that trades required. They knew how to use metals, as they've already asserted and proved in Africa. They made the earliest attempts at writing, for the whole Egyptian tradition attributes the art to Tehute, that the Greeks called Thoth, the great Hermes, another term for Tehute, and Anu, like Osiris, who was called the Onion or the Ani. Certainly, the people already knew the principal arts. It left proof of this in the architecture of the tombs at Abydos, especially the tomb of Osiris, and is found in the bearing and unmistakable stamp of their origin, carved in ivory and seen throughout the country. In other words, all the elements of Kemetic civilization, from their philosophy to the foundations of their architecture, their mathematics, their book of coming forth by day, all of it was laid in this pre-dynastic people, the people who brought humanity to the world, civilized Africa and the world, raised up the world's greatest civilization. So when we ask then, in conclusion, why is it important to know this? What other people would even ask that question? What other people would ask a question like, why is it important that I know that I made the greatest historical achievements in the history of the world? Who else would ask that question but remote control, automatic pilot, 00 soul Negro? You hear me? And if I'll tell you this, I was in that state once, so not in that extreme of state. But when you know what you've been, when you know the heights that you have reached, then you have just got a glimpse of what you can do. And so when we look at this past, it's an indication of the future that we have ahead of us. One of the biggest mistakes they made was bringing us into this country. That was a big mistake. Yeah, we would have rather not come. You hear me? Rather stayed in our homeland. But now we're up in this place, in strategic positions. And as people who, I've gone for life readings and stuff like that. As you may have guessed, I have a little spirit side to me. And one of the great readers that read my life predicted the books I would write, which was accurate. Predicted a whole lot of stuff. It was very accurate. He said this, and this is reading destiny, not just me, but a lot of others who are playing this role. You African Americans come from an old civilization. America's new, and what I would add is falling apart. He said, you're bringing the old, the ancient, and you're bringing it into a society. And the team of you all are laying a structural outline for a future. He said, this is a good thing. Yeah, at a time of global warming, where Western science has waged war on nature and puts nature on the brink of destruction, where this planet will soon be unlivable, you need a paradigm that's balanced and just. It comes out of these societies. In a society based on barbarism and savagery, killing off 90% of the Native Americans, enslaving the Africans, stealing the Latino, the Mexicans' land, and then calling them alien. Our culture, along with other great cultures in this country, but ours playing a leading role, is going to be the basis for taking something that's crooked and making it straight. That was King and Malcolm's conclusion. King hadn't studied much. about ancient African civilization. But King was his self an expression of the best of that culture. And I'm going to throw out something here. This is a theme I'll deal with another time. It'll really throw a bunch of you all off. And I know I'm talking to conscious people here. We debate whether we have a culture. I was talking to the sister on Pan-African TV, Sister Tatu, Dr. Tatu. And I was telling her, you know, we have a debate among some Blacks in this country whether we have a culture, but our culture is the popular culture in the United States and the world. And she says, of course, Black people outside this country see what a lot of us don't see. But I'm going to lay something else on you, and I'm not going into it. I'm just going to lay it on you. And this is something for you to really swallow and think about. Black people in this country have created a civilization. You hear me? Yes, with contradictions. I mean, you know, why not? You come under slavery and you come under what I call semi-colonial oppression. Sure, we got our holes, we got our problems. But when you look at the edifice we've created, that's high civilization, baby. You hear me? And all civilizations, and especially those under oppression, have their contradictions. And you can't even call this one civilized that you're under. So that is the product of what you come out of. It's in your bone marrow. I was making the point last week on the Twa that at its essence, its greatest contribution is character. And that's a normal quality for our people, even at a time where some of us have really departed from character like we have never done before. We got some Blacks now who are pure monsters. Pure monsters. Never had that before. But they've been created in a brew of drugs, in a brew of tearing down families and communities. And so we've got a task to rebuild. And you can't rebuild off of nothing. You got to have a foundation. When you build a house, the foundation needs to be deep. And you can't have a deeper foundation than the foundation of ma'at, harmony, truth, justice, right order. Most of our people have never heard of that term, though it's been popularized. More Blacks have heard of it than any time before, and many others. But the fact is, that's what most of our parents teach us. They just then use the term ma'at, ethics, truthfulness, being right, being kind, being good. And so this past is a key to your present, but more important, it's the key to your future. And what's good about all of this stuff is you can learn about it now and live it now while you're preparing for something bigger. And I'm doing this show mainly because I want to reach people I haven't been able to reach before. I'm tired of talking to the choir, and especially young people, but anyone whose eyes is open, but especially young people. That has been my main concern. And so a time of every week I put into preparing for this show, but for one reason, the future, baby, the future. You hear me? The future's in your hands. And the more conscious of it you are, then the more of it you're going to be able to shape. So this topic has been the Twa, or Anu, the founders of Kemet, Egypt, the world's greatest civilization. Just as the Anu called themselves great ones, you are a great people. The more you know your greatness, the more you're going to be able to achieve. So I hope you got something out of this. As I said earlier, some of you tuned in a little later. If we work the things out, Dr. Obinga and I will be having a conversation next week on this show, but I have to be sure that he's set up for this. And if he is, we'll have him on. And if he isn't, then you'll see whatever the next topic is. But this was the logical next topic to bring on the best person on dynastic Kemet in the world, a good friend of mine, multi-dimensional genius. And as I pointed out, They've just built a university in Congo, Brazzaville that can hold 50,000 students. Obenga is the architect of that in that he laid it out. I thought it was in his name. It's in the name of the president of the Congo. Obenga's too humble to even want it in his name. But his fingerprints are all over it. And probably make it one of the best universities in the world. So we'll have a chance to also talk about that. So that's it. I hope you got something out of this. If you didn't, shame on you. Hotep. And we get into any comments that people have. Oh, this is from 0077. I like that. 7 is my number, you know. I entered the movement when I was 21 years of age, 3 times 7. There's a lot of things behind that. He says, I love that you are a warrior scholar and supported our best in that way. And then Sexy Black Jag, hello Tashaka, hello to you. And she said, I'm late, but I have to rewatch this later. Fania McKinney, thank you for sharing, very informative. Now, when you say that, this is from Nix 0077, when you say that the Twa were kicked out of Kemet, could that be what was shown on the Narmer plate? Yeah, what happens is the larger Africans who make their presence into Kemet, they're Africans, they're all Africans, but the Anu are the original. They make their way in. And after a while, there's a struggle for control and power. And the Narmer palette shows a picture where the pharaoh Menes is knocking an opponent upside his head. There's another picture of them defeating the pharaoh Scorpion. Scorpion was Anu, and he looked just like the rest of the Anu. Ma'at community. Is it more accurate to say Ani achieved us? Jesus. This just went down. Let me get this down here. No, I see what's happening here. Just had what I'm trying to find. Here's another one here. Dynastic just means families of rulers passing rulership down by blood, right? Yes. Those are dynastic periods. And the pharaoh's right to rule came through the line of the wife, the line of the woman, because this was a matrifocal system. It's twin lineal. This is a term that I've created based on the mother principle. It was male, female, but inclined towards the woman. So the right to be pharaoh came through the woman. And so in Kemet, you had royal incest, which we know is not a good thing, but it meant that the pharaoh, who was the wife's brother, gained right to rule through his sister, which meant also under matrifocal systems in Africa, the head of the family is not the woman, it's the wife's eldest brother. So in this case, her husband is also, in most cases, eldest brother. And so that's also putting him in a position of exercising some power. James Burris, It is loving Blacks for me, the people who injustice is given upon. Yeah, right. And James Burris, again, fight for freedom and justice. Let's see what else we have here. A revolutionary matron. We need to have a process for reestablishing intergenerational trust so that the knowledge can be effectively transferred. Yes, I think that's true. That's a good point. And we need bridges also. And one of the most important bridges for intergenerational cooperation, along with trust, is culture. We have a common culture, and a lot of older generation African Americans don't understand that hip hop, as the rubric for the art form, too often incorrectly called the culture, is an extension of funk, is an extension of the art forms of African American culture. So that's a bridge, that's a commonality. And then, of course, we know for all people, wisdom is an essential thing for moving forward. There's a common saying in the streets now, I've said it before, that today common sense isn't so common. And in part, that's due to a breakdown in the linkage between the young and the old, because it's wisdom that we get from our elders, at least those that are wise. So yeah, I agree. Trust is a part of it. And part of it is understanding why these breakdowns have occurred, which I presented in part through this analysis called The Choice Between Two Cultures. And we'll get into that more at another time. Gladys Harris, overjoyed to work, learn, and listen. James Burris, they getting weak, them powers that be you speak of. You got that right. And when you're weak, you strike out. So be careful. But we're in the period of the decline of the US. The fall of the West has already taken place. Yeah, they still have a shadow. European Union, Germany is still standing, but the sun is set on the British Empire. The West can't set up the colonial empires, but they're using the neo-colonial World Bank, International Monetary Fund to keep people in poverty. But they have impoverished their own people, especially in this country, so much. It's hard to stand on this. Gladys Harris, either 21st century people will take action, especially explicating goodwill spirit towards Black chocolate people. Yeah, and whether they do or not, we do it towards ourselves and build power. I don't care 2 cents what other people think about me or my people, as long as you have the power to keep them off of you, but mainly organize and build power that can replace this mess. James Burris, reparations for African Americans need reparations, or am I wrong? Yes, certainly. And I would say that it takes powerful people to really get it. Gladys Harris. So we people were engagingly gouging and were spitting at kids in 60s. Okay, some people were disrespecting kids in the 60s. Yeah, but what I would say about the 60s and 50s is we had extended family communities where communities raised our children. So we had some people departing from that way, but we basically had communities that would take care of us. And many people who even came out of families that were really messed up, many of them will often say, it was that community that saved me. People in that community that took me in, that showed me love. And it's that extended family community made up of people who are friends, not necessarily blood relations, that got hit hardest by the drug traffic and busting up Black communities. We have to rebuild that. James Burroughs, the enemy's greatest tactic is propaganda, but do not mistake that they have a lot more tricks up their sleeve. Oh yeah, sure. Strategy is my first love, my man. He also says, I thought Bloods and Crips was a gang from a movie. Yeah, it was a real deal, baby. This is a person, Tapatia. Malcolm was a Garveyite, not Jobs. Yeah. Well, Malcolm the Garveyite took the nation that was broke to 75 million. Guess how? Those millions, those 75 million came from Nation of Islam members who had jobs. And guess what? The money that financed the Garvey movement came largely from jobs. That money also financed Black businesses. So don't put your head in the sand. And right now, main reason the Black family has been busted is that the average brother or sister can't get a job that pays enough to support a family. And so the fight for jobs, that was a piece of Malcolm's propaganda that was pure bull. And I told you, we jacked him up on that. Was that you're begging if you get a job? Really? You're the one that's keeping these businesses alive. You got $1 trillion plus economy, and a lot of your money's going out in other places, and you're not entitled to a job. Yeah, and we're entitled to build businesses. The second largest employer of Black people are Black businesses, 90% of which are owned by one person. So yeah, we need businesses, but that's going to take care of, on average, one person. So we also need jobs. And that's something, if you ignore that, then you're ignoring the reality of poverty in the Black community right now. I led one of those movements, produced thousands of jobs for people. So don't neglect that. And at this era, good paying jobs. Another comment, I never went to Africa or India. I do not have a passport, so I listen. And it's different as an African American. Why do I feel more out of place than them? Because you're not wanted here. You catch hell here. And if you can, get a passport and go to Africa. You know, don't cost that much. You're going home, you know, check it out. But Africa's right here in your backyard. Black folks, Africans, some of us know it, some of us don't. Okay, this one I missed before, the Ma'at community. Is it more accurate to say Ani achieved Asar realization, a universal divine principle? I think I know what you're talking about. Is this a highly evolved being? I would say that clearly this was a highly evolved civilization, and this was the ancestor or founder of that civilization in the Nile Valley. So this was very highly evolved. And what I would say that's been underestimated about the Twa, Anu, both hunter-gatherer and agrarian, and for that matter, Stone Age. Is it because they're the first people? African systems of deep thought all acknowledge that it's the first people who are the closest to wisdom. So I've mentioned this before among the Bambara. The first ancestors are considered to be the source of wisdom because they are the ones closest to God. And they are considered to be the most wise. And by that, they also mean the most just, because in African system, wisdom is associated with truth. In European systems, truth and knowledge and truth and wisdom are not necessarily connected. So I think that one of the greatest powers that the Anu and the Twa have are the paranormal powers because of their virtue. George Washington Carver was piping into God's mind all the time because he had gifts, but he was humble and a good human being. And therefore, it took his knowledge to the highest plane. And I think that's the nature of the Anu, in that being good people, practicing justice, the authors of Ma'at, Masuri, but the practitioners of it, and being the first, they are closest to primal powers or God powers in the sense of wisdom and knowledge. And so I think this is more than anything the reason that they do so much innovation in civilization. James Pooh, can you say more about the revolutionary African scholar distinction? Yeah, most of our scholars and most of our people are either at the stage of being Black, which is the state of our culture. Some of them assimilated, as I was. These are stages of consciousness that I'll be going into in more depth in this show. Black is that state of the culture that Blacks created in this country, and race consciousness drives it. And out of the best of race consciousness is deep race pride. Generally speaking, people at the Black stage of consciousness are conflicted on Africa. So they may or may not want to have anything to do with Africa. Most don't want to. In episodes, they will. A Free South Africa movement, they'll get behind it. But on a day-to-day movement, they don't have great depth of interest in Africa and some negative ideas about Africa. So then some of us are able to move to this stage of African identity. We embrace our history and our culture. What's different about the distinction between African scholars who are revolutionary and those that are not is the revolutionary scholar is about using the past, being engaged in struggle, because the revolutionary is engaged in struggle for changing the society in ways that radically restructure it, radically transform it. Most scholars are not in that stage. Most of our people are not either. So that's a distinction. One of the problems with some of our people who are political and revolutionary is they don't often see the value of our ancient African history. So very often they're buying into someone else's definition of a revolution. So that's a problem. So, you need both. Sylvia Standback, sorry I missed out on talking with Dr. Abenga when he was teaching in the ASCAC conference, didn't know before who I was standing. Yeah, well, hopefully we'll have some time to dialogue with him. For people that don't, I think most people on this show know, ASCAT is Association for the Study of Classical African Civilization. They've been doing some good work on ancient African history, particularly Kemet. Worley Smith, absolutely amazing. I appreciate you and your work so much. Peace and blessings from another Black brother, retired educator in Abidjan, Virginia. By the way, make sure you subscribe. Encourage people to subscribe. We have to grow this show. I'm not out to make money or anything. though I'm going to probably be asking for some donations pretty soon because all of this coming out of my pocket. This has been 6 months. I pay a crew to put this show on. So I might ask for some donations, but I want to resist going the sponsorship, corporate sponsors and having ads and all this stuff. Since we go on over 1,000, we've got a good diverse listenership. There'd be a lot of people that would like to do that. Corporations, I'm not interested. So give some support. Let me see if there's anything else here. Maybe winding up here. A question by NJX0077. So what kind of leadership succession do the Anu have if they were not dynastic? I didn't say they weren't dynastic. I just said that they were the source of pharaonic leadership. So obviously that's dynastic. We don't know all the details because we don't have the names of all of the pharaohs of ancient Kemet. The information that I presented here shows you that they founded it and that they continued it. And it also shows you that the basis for what you call the divine principle or netter for pre-dynastic Kemet was Set, not Horus or Heru. And that also tells you that probably the story of Set cutting his brother up into pieces was not a story that the Anu bought, because they certainly wouldn't have been treating Set, the killer of the founder of their people, their civilization, as the netter for Pharaoh. So the point is, they obviously had dynastic succession, and longer than the dynastic period. Now, was it complete? Was it more than one region? Most historians who study this period conclude that in order to have this level of creativity, then Kemet had to be peaceful for a fairly long period of time. The fact that they lived in walled cities, though, tell you that they also had to protect themselves from outsiders who could be threatening to what they had. But it appears that there was succession. And note, when I was giving you the Herodotus story, they're showing you a line of chief priests going back 10,000 years. That's succession. They are patterning themselves. They are servants of the pharaoh. So this is going to pre-dynastic as well as through dynastic history. Sylvia Standback, do you think Marcus Garvey understood the African origins of religion? No. Even though, and by the way, Garvey's my first master. I've read more on Garvey than I can explain. I learned a lot from him. Garvey had a wing of his organization, the African Orthodox Church, headed by Bishop McGuire. Bishop McGuire was very Afrocentric. In fact, his religious orientation was about as advanced as it is now. But Garvey was himself a Catholic, and Garvey frowned on what's called obeah, which is the African form of religion in the Caribbean. He called it dirty obeah. So that had been part of his brainwashing. So no, while he was a hell of a leader and best organizer in the 20th century of Blacks, at least in the Western Hemisphere, and set the tone for African independence in many ways, he had some problems when it came to the indigenous culture of the Caribbean that is heavily African, and that includes African American indigenous culture. This is NJX0077. Africa is a state of mind. I was born and bred in Africa, and I too felt out of place. I feel I became an African by studying from great teachers like, no, this is nice of you to say this, like Dr. Tashaka, definitely Dr. John Henry Clark, and so many others. Now, it sounds like he's literally saying he's from Africa, but he's been born into Africa by studying Africa, and apparently here. And I think that's true because of the brainwashing that Africans all over the world have faced. In fact, education, higher education, and even secondary education in Africa is very European. So I could see why you'd need some re-education. Let me see this here. Terranetta, Anu. The Afrocentric scholarship don't talk enough about the Anu enough. The Kemetic Neteru were all Anu. Aset, Asar, Set, Heru, and others. The Anu people, the earth, brought civilization and higher culture. Very correct. And so all those founding ancestors, including Tehute, who is attributed to be the source of civilization, which may have really been a metaphor for a lot of people that created it, were also Anu. Ma'at community. Is your education programs designed with the Asar realization? Is the ultimate revolution we need as Africans globally? Yes, but they all go on at the same time. And so while we're addressing the need for change, psychological, political, social, economic, here, the same thing globally. So yes, and the same miseducation system is used globally. So we have to address it globally. These are some good questions, by the way. This is why I like to have the open mic. Ma'at community, again, NJX 077, Ma'at community. Most of us are not ready for being taught Asar realization. I'm not saying that we should not do this. I am saying that we need real Asar, I guess, political knowledge to do this, and these are few and far between. Yes, but the point is, part of the reason it may appear that we're not ready is that's all we know. And so we know, and so this work that I'm doing right now on SEBA and apprenticeship systems and a number of other things is based on having gone through an African system of education, one that brings out the gifts that are within, which is SEBA, the light, one of which involves mastering masters, apprenticeship. That's what John Henry Clark went through. So some of us simply don't know what this is. And a lot of us have not had identified the stages of awakening that we're going through. So we're going through it. We may not always know, well, what's next or what gave rise to it. So this is part of what we have to systematize. And this is revolutionary work, but you have to do this on yourself first before you can share it with anybody else. But at the same time, African American culture and African culture are the same on this, in that African and African American culture does not separate knowing from being. To know something, you have to be what you know. And assuming you're talking about the truth and things like that, that's African American as well as African. And that's what our parents teach us. And so we have to go through that, understand that, discard the system that we've been raised up and miseducated under to, get people open to that. But it's in us already. NJX0077. Yeah, right on, sister. I am a she, and you are right about my Africa being a state of mind comment. Okay, good comments and good questions, and any critique you want to do, I appreciate that. I want to stress, if you want to go to Pan African DTV, and I did a show day before yesterday on the twin lineal system coming out of the mother principle, African family system. So Pan African DTV, over to Shaka and put in the date, the 28th of May. And I'll be on 2 times on Pan African Congress Movement, African Liberation Day, Sunday and Monday, dealing with economics and reparations. So Hotep, I've enjoyed this. I hope you got something out of it.